Let's roll on. All right, perfect. So, songwriting can be a super personal process.
Yeah.
How did you go about approaching any of the songwriting choices on Let It All Lay Bare?
Well, it being my fifth studio album, I've definitely, spent time on past albums, with more, not always surface level stuff, but, as I spend more time writing and obviously listening to my favorite artists, you really kind of dig into the fact that, like, the best songs are deeply personal. You don't have to know the whole story, and sometimes just the emotion, the feeling, like, of whatever the songwriting content is, like, just evokes that in you. I really tried to not shy away from, like, topics that were more taboo or just things I didn't want to talk about. So I really try my best to be as vulnerable as possible, which is a learning process, as a writer. And I think, as I continue to write, it's like, how do I go even a little bit deeper, a little bit more vulnerable? But, of course, without being, like, turning people away or turning people off. So,
Awesome.
yeah. This one, so Let It All Lay Bare it came right at the end of the album before it, which was Time Will Tell. So we literally finished production and mixing and started pretty much the same week. The cool thing was that Mike Davis and I had a good, creative relationship, a working relationship. And so I was able to bring all the songs to him, and we dived deeper into pre-production than I've ever gotten into in any album. And so we really hashed through every song. We sat in, he had a little personal studio that was like a arts and crafts type place, and we just sat down and, like, hacked through the songs. Really made, like, very deliberate key choices for each song, rhythmic choices. We dove way into all the bridges of, like, how to build out, like, the musical bridge. It was such a fun process because we got to really, make some deliberate musical choices. Pre-production for me is everything. So that's one of the ways we really expanded this album. And then the other was that all the players, the studio musicians had played on the previous album. So again, there's a good cohesive, like, working relationship for everybody, and we got everyone in the same room, which, unfortunately these days is not as common in music. So, everybody was playing live, and there's, some organic, creative ability just right there on the spot, of the bass player working off the keyboard player, working off me, working on the, just a organic musical situation. So
No, I love that.
yeah. Some of them, I mean, we'd already started in on a fair amount of them from the previous album. We were at the same studio, same engineer, so there was some just rollover, like, extra tracks from Time Will Tell. So that was an easy choice, where it was like, well, we already have this one started. And I just kind of would grab, some iPhone recordings and send them over to the producer. And then, as we were getting mixes back, I always just pop stuff into SoundCloud, because the fun thing about that is you can move the tracks in their order. So for me, track listing is one of my favorite things, because back in the day, I'd make mix tapes and mix CDs all the time. And we had these fun, like, interludes between songs, and then some of those things got scrapped just because the track order didn't quite work. So there was a lot that went into that, and it was really fun. Yeah, and one other thing that's been really helpful to me is recording to vinyl, because you have the A side and the B side, and you have this idea of, like, the A side starts with a single and the B side starts with a single, and so that's kind of helped inform me in terms of a track list of length and of, like, where the singles go, where the deeper cuts go. So that process has been really helpful to me, and that was part of how we ended up with the track list that we did. I mean, one thing that the producer would say over and over is, he says, consistency is boring.
Right.
And we really tried our best to, like, give each song its own spotlight. Like, try to not make an album, try to make songs, that then fit together. So you could go, one could be a more bluegrassy, the other could be more rock forward. I know that Noah Gunderson played a huge part in the influence of this. I had kind of picked up an electric guitar and had been in lessons quite a bit, and so I really wanted to push myself as playing the guitar solos and the melodic stuff on the electric and even on the acoustic. So I'd seen him perform at the Showbox in downtown Seattle, and he does a pretty cool job of like, he'll pick up the guitar, play it for a song, set it down, play piano for a song. So he really covers stage space and really has dynamics. There's no need to overplay. There's no need to like wow people with like this incredible, crazy 200 note solo. It was like, this is what we're trying to get at, we're going to say it, and we're going to move on. His approach to electric guitar really kind of influenced what I ended up recording on this project. So there's a bit of blues, but more modern guy. Amos Lee has always been a big one, just because the songwriting's great, of course, but the production for me, I really like interesting, unique production, and I feel like the stuff he's put out, especially over the last couple albums, has been a big influence. So we definitely use those as reference tracks. The last 4 songs on the album, which were Aurora was the single that came off that. We went like a little more into like a headphone friendly mix, where it was a little more of electronic feel. Like we definitely threw some like hi-hat snare stuff in that was more along the lines of like a little bit of EDM influence. We'd finished 6 songs in studio with everybody, and then the last 4 on the record, we were in this remote setup. So we got the opportunity to really delve into details, and so there was definitely influence, from the electronic world and like more modern singer-songwriter, where you get a little bit into crossover, between folk and electronic and rock. So we went a little deep into that. I mean, the thing is, like, growing up, like you are where you are. Like, I didn't have any context of being rural versus city growing up, and looking back, it's like, yeah, I grew up somewhere very rural, and of course that plays a huge influence on your perception of the world and the way you write, and even like your musical style. One thing about West Coast, I would say, there's a lot less question about like what's your genre. It's just like, just get out and write and perform. As I started touring more nationally, I got connected in with the Americana Fest and the Americana Music Association and NSAI, and you kind of get more in your lanes of like, this is your genre. You're not country, you're not rock, this, that. That kind of helped me learn a little bit more about my childhood. Like, oh yeah, I am actually rural. Like, there's going to be some mandolin in the music. There's definitely acoustic influence. There's definitely more of a bent towards writing about nature, writing about the outdoors, and that's been a really healthy process. And I took a lot of that for granted. It gives me a lot of content as an adult to look back on my childhood and write about and reminisce about and appreciate. So that that played a big part in it. I didn't really have much musical interest as a young kid, but right about 13, 14, I discovered there's a classical guitar sitting in my closet in my bedroom. Apparently my mom had played when she was younger, but I didn't know my mom to have ever played guitar. But I just pulled it out, and there was like a little Mel Bay chord book and like a little tuning whistle so you could tune the strings. So I just started kind of plunking around, didn't understand anything about music theory or even really know bands that well. I just kind of enjoyed music. One of my best friends was also doing the same thing at the same time, so he and I kind of like matched up and started sharing ideas for finger picking and like, oh, this is what a key is, like the key of E, like, oh, you can play these chords with that key. And so we just discovered together our connection at that point was the church, because we had youth group and we had like a lot of songs happening. So I got plugged into that, and same with my best friend. So, and there was a really good scene there. Like, there was a lot of songwriting happening. So we had a pretty cool group there. And then as I got a little bit older, there was a very cool indie scene, because it was sort of the era of like true indie music. Grunge had just been kind of finishing up. I never quite got on the bandwagon of Soundgarden and Audioslave was later on, but Soundgarden, Nirvana, I was a little too young because I couldn't, it was just a little before my time. But we had, Death Cab for Cutie was starting to come out, and Some local bands were kind of taking that route, and that was a ton of fun because you had alternate tunings, you had a much more kind of like poetic approach to songwriting that was kind of post-grunge. I started getting involved in a small town music scene, which looking back, there's some amazing bands that had been writing and recording and performing. So definitely that played a big role in my songwriting as well. So yeah, as I finished college, my first and foremost what I wanted to do was like get into web design and then be able to be remote and tour as a musician and do web to kind of fill in the gaps for finances. So that took a long time to develop to where I'm at now, just because business is a slow process. So I'm doing IT consulting now, and so that has really helped me get out on the road. But kind of going back to the Seattle scene, again, I was so young when I moved to Seattle that I took a lot of how the scene was sort of structured for granted, because it was just something I just stepped into.
Yeah.
And now that I've spent a lot of time, touring the country, one of the strongest things I've noticed about the Seattle scene is just grassroots recording studio setup that they have, where the quality is really good. Like you can get into some really nice neighborhood type recording studios that are doing amazing work, amazing production, amazing engineering. So looking back, it's like, man, I could get in, especially starting out, I could get into a studio space for like a couple $100 a day, and get good quality recordings, which is pretty rare in other parts of the country. So that song Chief Joseph is one where the chord progression and the melody had literally been just sitting around for like 7 years. I knew that it had like some power in it in terms of just from a songwriting perspective, but I never quite could put a theme with it. So I brought it to Mike, and again, we didn't know what it was going to end up as, but he right off the bat, he was like, yeah, this has got some power. And so he kind of envisioned this sort of ramp process where it starts rather intimate and then just continues working its way up in dynamics. So he just kind of ran with it and just went hard into pre-production. That was one of the 4 songs that was kind of like post-COVID, like headphone friendly type thing. And I had been reading this book by Kent Nerburn on Chief Joseph and the flight of the Nez Perce. Great, beautiful story, like very well written. I was very inspired by it. So I took the concepts from that book and tried my best to like narrow them down into a song. And my brother and I, we lived close enough to the Nez Perce, like the modern day, where the Nez Perce, the remnants of the tribe are living. So we drove to Idaho and got to actually like take a little day trip around the Clearwater River and see like these historic, sites that they had, because then you had a location, like especially, very clear idea in your mind. So, between visiting the sites and reading the book, to then put those to song, with Chief Joseph. Well, it was a bit accidental. I had just filmed the prior single, which was Time Will Tell, and we chose a beautiful outdoor area in Washington State, right near Wenatchee. And so kind of looking through that footage, it was like, I really like this, and it's authentic because I spend time in these areas. I kind of wanted to contrast. My initial thought was like, I would like to do something in the snow. And so I was talking to my friend in Colorado, who's also into videography. She said, there's this beautiful sand dune, it's called the Great Sand Dunes in southern Colorado. So rather than doing snow theme, we could do like the sand, because it's just such a stark contrast. So we filmed there right before COVID happened. Had filmed Simple Kind, which was released on this album, and we're coming back into cell reception, and all of a sudden I got all these emails and texts, and everything was blowing up, kind of reintegrated into all the changes that had happened just in a couple days with COVID. And so that sort of lent itself to, well, definitely not performing on the stage. So this, concept that had started with the Great Sand Dunes then started into, going to film in Saguaro National Park, going to film in the Olympics. Because I was within driving distance, as COVID started to kind of open up at least a little bit, I could get outside, bring a gimbal and tripod along. I did a lot of the filming myself. A lot of the time-lapse stuff that you see, I just was me in a backpack, literally just like filming in the middle of the night. Did some of the B-roll myself, and then Britt would come along and do vocals, or my brother would come along and do vocals. It kind of came out of just natural organic growth, and also what was even allowed and could happen at the time. So unfortunately, the location of some of them I didn't get to necessarily double down on, and it became more of like an overall kind of artistic approach, like just the cinematography of it. I asked Spencer, who is one of the videographers, cinematographers, this is our theme. What are some places in the world that you've always wanted to film? And his immediate reaction was, I want to do a slot canyon. But they don't exist very, very often on the planet. But in Utah, Arizona, we got a chance to go into Wire Pass Trail just outside Page, Arizona, and it was a blast. Got down and filmed, and just once you get moving with a camera through the slot canyons, it's just incredible. Yeah, Aurora kind of got lucky with that one. It was written based on my friend Britt, who has been filming a lot of these, had been up in Iceland and seen the Northern Lights. At the time, I had never actually seen the Northern Lights. So I was writing it as an account of her story of being up there. Obviously, Iceland is very hard to get to, especially during COVID and during just being international. But, Washington State has some visibility of the Northern Lights depending on the time of year and the extent of the solar activity. There's a national park right outside Bellingham, Washington. So he and I just actually it was a quick day shoot. Like we met at his apartment and then went up to the ski resort, which is Mount Baker Ski Resort, which is on a national park. And we literally shot for maybe 4 hours. And we were very fortunate because there was a massive snow dump like that weekend, in the ballpark of almost like 2 feet of snow in a weekend. So we just had a great time, and he had an amazing filming rig because he does a lot of outdoor mountain bike style videos, and so he had a great setup for outdoors. We just kind of knocked it out in the afternoon and in the evening. Got a chance to put in some actual Aurora B-roll from Alaska. And the cool thing was, after the whole process of recording and filming, I still had not seen the Northern Lights, and I got invited to perform up in Fairbanks at this beautiful venue called the Botel right on the Chain River. And after the show, I was starting to load up gear, and my friend pointed to the sky, and she's like, oh, they're starting to come out. And so we went on the back deck of the Botel, and sure enough, we got about 25-minute amazing Northern Lights show. And so that kind of tied the whole experience together of getting to see it, witness it for myself after all that. Well, and that's the thing about Washington State, there's so much just diversity in the climate, because Mount Baker's probably 6,000-7,000 feet elevation, so you get a lot of snow. It's a ski resort I performed at a ton, and it gets the most snowfall of any place in the lower 48, because the moisture just comes straight across the Pacific, and it's one of the first mountains that it encounters, so it just gets blasted with snow.